Welcome to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and mission of the church. My name is Levi Pancake. I serve as a pastor at a local church in Syracuse, New York. And today I have Jordan Stinziano, colleague, close friend, fellow elder, and a cold brew coffee connoisseur, all in one person. Today we're going to talk about
It's the first time I've been called that.
Yeah, well, I'm going off the cuff a bit.
Okay.
So, we work with church leaders around the world. We're helping them think through the nature and the purpose of the church.
Yep.
And one of the main things that we talk about is the priesthood of all believers. We've called it the instrumentality of all of Christ's people, and seeing the people, the church, the people of God, as the church leadership's greatest asset towards reaching a particular place with the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, when a church thinks about success, it can get skewed.
Sure.
It can get messed up. Oftentimes, marketplace values, how big, how large, how many, those become the factors. And they're not inherently evil.
No.
But they're not always the most biblically faithful way to measure whether a church is being faithful and a church is being successful. And so I wanted to see if today you and I could talk a bit about what we call measurable values and how a church leadership can evaluate if they're being faithful to what God calls leadership and God calls the church to be and do, and how those things are actually measured. So can you introduce the values that we talk about?
Sure.
Just high level, explain what they are, and then we can unpack that a bit more for the listeners.
Sure. Last time we were together, we talked about the idea of target-driven, circle of accountability, and which is what we call, it's like a do, right? And so we're going to talk today a little bit about the be, right? This idea of what types of people are we called to be in order to do the thing that God has called us to do. Oftentimes, because of the nature of our work, there's a missiological aspect to what Saturation Church Planting does, that people think that we're just a missions agency and that we're just concerned with that. And yet, the majority of the work that we do is discipleship type work and training guys in how to form people. We see churches get planted. Our name has church planting in it.
Yep.
And so people think we're just a church planting organization. Not that there's anything about just church planting. But it's primarily about building people.
Yep.
And so we have an expectation of what those people that are going to fill that circle look like, if that makes sense, of what a disciple looks like. And
We have a biblical expectation.
A biblical expectation. And so these values that we're going to talk about, in my brain, I think of them like 5 big buckets of discipleship. Some people might have 6. Some people,
Sure.
So they're not the only 5 things that you can look at, but they are 5 biblical buckets of discipleship that I think life falls into.
I often explain it, if we had a whiteboard, if we just started popcorning, asking people, what's a disciple, who is a disciple, what do they do? We listed everything. We come up with hundreds of things.
Yeah.
But all the things we can come up with, evangelism, hospitality, read the Bible, they could all fall into these 5 buckets that you're talking about.
I agree. And so they're broad and yet specific, I think. The first one is that we're going to have an expectation that the majority of Christ's people are going to be pursuing intimacy with God, that they've been through the blood of Christ, and now the Spirit of God has brought them into an awareness and into the life of faith, that they're gonna desire to grow in this relationship with the Father that they've been ushered into, and the beautiful thing about being a Christian is that God has given us means by which we can have relationship with him. Beautiful relationship with him. He's made himself known to us in the scriptures. Like everything that I need for life and godliness, he's given me. And so we want to see the majority of Christ's people. Well, I want to see all of them, but I want to see them, as our friend Dwight talks about, like taking baby steps initially. But I want to see them growing in pursuing intimacy with him, daily spending time with him, opening up the scriptures and listening to him speak to them in his word, spending time pouring out their hearts to him in prayer, and spending time with the people of God, right, as another means of grace, and where they're able to serve the people of God, but also the people of God are able to speak back into their lives. So pursuing an intimate relationship with God, and all that comes with that, and out of that, they're able to serve other people, and so we want to see them abiding, as Christ says, right? And so we want them growing in that relationship, and so we as leaders then need each of these things. We're going to have to help facilitate.
Yeah.
Right. So a primary thing that leaders are doing is how are people going to grow in that relationship with God? You're going to have to help them with that. It's not enough to just throw a Bible in their hands and right. So
preaching and teaching can be a part of that.
Preaching
but
and
also
teaching
them how to read the Bible.
Absolutely.
Understand hermeneutics,
all sorts of things,
Bible reading plans, figuring out ways where they can experience Christian fellowship, grow in the disciplines of grace, all of that.
You and I were talking yesterday about fasting, right? And how to mobilize people in that discipline, right? And so there's myriad ways that you're going to want to encourage people to grow in their relationship with the Lord, and to just love him.
Yep.
Right? He's loved them. And not in a legalistic manner or anything like that, but to just grow.
These are people who are justified.
Yeah.
They have, they're regenerate. They have a new heart, but to continue to mature. And conform to the image of Christ.
Absolutely. And so that's the first one that we're looking at.
So pursuit of God would be that first of 5 buckets, so to speak,
absolutely.
5 values. Okay.
Absolutely. And then we're looking at the fruit of the Spirit.
So that's the second one.
That's the second one. And obviously this is the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit, because the Spirit of God lives within these people. They've been brought into relationship with God through the Son, and now his Spirit lives within them. We're looking for them to now walk in step with the Spirit. So decisions that look like people who are walking with Jesus. And so obviously you have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control.
Gentleness. You forgot gentleness. You only listed 8. Yep.
It's okay. I'm not gonna beat myself up over that, right?
Nor is it intended to be an exhaustive list. You could go to 2 Peter 1. You got
exactly, but we're looking for the fruit of God's Spirit to be born out in the way that they live their lives. Not in a legalistic way,
not sinlessly perfect,
right? And nor am I now going to create programs so that they can check each one of those off and say which one do you need to work on this month per se, but I'm looking for husbands that love their wives and are gentle with them, right? I'm looking for wives that love their husbands, right? They don't just say, well, I'm a Christian. Okay, well, demonstrate that in the way that you interact with one another, in the way that you serve one another. Demonstrate that in the way that you are in your workplace, right? It's one thing to... I want you to share the gospel. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want you to also demonstrate to your coworkers the difference that the gospel continues to make in your life as you're making decisions that flip the world upside down. They're actually right side up decisions because this is the way you were created.
In light of eternity, they're right side up.
In light of eternity, they're right side up.
Yep.
But compared to the world, they're upside down decisions because those that don't have the Spirit of God living within them, it doesn't make any sense that you're not going to cheat or that you're not going to steal or that you're not going to put yourself above other people.
Yep.
Right? So we want you to walk in step with the Spirit rather than gratifying the flesh.
Right.
Right? So we want to see the majority of Christ's people making those decisions. again, and not in a legalistic way, but in a way that gives glory to their Father.
Yeah, we can, as church leaders, we can call people towards that. We can champion and expect it because the scriptures do. A good tree produces good fruit.
Absolutely.
And continue to teach, mobilize, encourage, strengthen people to Philippians 2, to have the same attitude as Jesus.
Right.
Consider others better than yourselves.
Right.
Serve others. So there you got work ethic there. You got attitude.
Right.
How they love their spouses, how they serve and disciple their children, how they interact with other people in their community and neighbors.
Right. So we're putting this out in front of people.
Yeah.
Constantly, rather than it just be, well, okay, you come on a Sunday morning, and maybe you come to some sort of small group situation.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're checking the boxes of traditional Christianity in the West.
Yeah. And for some churches, it starts and stops with, well, we're just or solely glad that you're here.
Right.
We hope something sticks.
Right.
I'm glad that they're there as well.
Right.
But that is merely a means to an end,
Right.
assuming they have the Spirit of God to help them
Right.
grow in the life of faith and
Right.
mission of the church.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, we're having an expectation that they're going to look like Jesus.
And one of the primary ways that we help as leaders people grow in the fruit of the Spirit, yes, the Spirit of God within them, but them being in biblical community
with one
Christian
another.
fellowship with one another.
Absolutely.
Because I am the most patient person in the world when it's just me, when I'm alone. When I get what I want,
don't
when
know.
I do what I want.
I don't know.
I think I'm
don't know.
certainly very joyful when that happens. But you put me in the context with other people,
Right.
where if I'm in the flesh, they can be an impediment to my aims and objectives.
Oh, yes, they can be.
But now you start rubbing shoulders with others, and that you begin to reveal how much more the Spirit of God needs to do in your life as it relates to patience, as it relates to joy, as it relates to kindness.
Again, to quote our friend Dwight, it's the place of optimal rubbing.
Yeah,
it's
you
the
wanna-
place where you rub Jesus in and rub Satan out.
Yeah.
Sin out.
In Christian fellowship.
Christian
That's one of the
fellowship.
primary ways the fruit of the Spirit is worked out in our lives.
Right, right. And so that's one of the ways that we can, as leaders, do that, is encourage them to be in those things. People make their own decisions.
You can't make anyone do something.
can't make
but you
anyone-
can champion and expect it,
You can't-
encourage, create the structures and strategies for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So go ahead, keep on.
I was just going to say, like, those that are, again, pursuing intimacy with Christ, right? They see the value in that, right? And for those that live in our country, those that live in our culture, we're a very independent people, right? And we're a very don't tell me what to do people.
Yeah, we really value our independence and autonomy.
Okay? And we like to choose the things that we participate in. And so these things run counter to that, right? This is submission to the lordship of Jesus Christ is really what you're calling people to. Submission to his word, right? Submission to a daily discipline of spending time with him, but I'm busy and I've got this and I've got that and the kids have soccer and I've got, work and all of these things. No, there's nothing more important, right? Let the dead bury the dead, right? Like, you follow me, Jesus says to that religious leader in Matthew chapter 8. And so you have that, and then you are calling them to relationships, right? And to bear these things out in their relationships with one another, but also their relationships with the world,
Yeah,
right? To demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit.
right. And not that those other, okay, you can take your kids to soccer. Of course, you've got to work. Of
course.
But those things are built on the foundation
Yes.
of Jesus.
Yes.
And then you live Christ-like
Yeah.
in those places that you're in.
Yeah.
Okay, so we covered two of the buckets: pursuit of God, fruit of the Spirit.
Right.
We said there were five
Right.
that we kind of put everything in the Scriptures in. So what's the third one?
Grace story.
Okay.
Right. What we're talking about there is the sharing of both the gospel and the way that the grace of God, which has now been applied to your life in the gospel, gets shared with those that you come in contact with. So the gospel is the same for all of us, right? So I come in contact with Christians all over the world, right? And so their gospel stories are the same. Jesus Christ, right? Born, crucified, risen, ascended. It's the same gospel. And yet the application of that how they came to faith, what was going on in their life, the way that grace interacted and intersected with their lives, and God opened their eyes and they submitted themselves and said yes. And now then the way that grace continues to sustain them, that's a unique story, right? And so we want them to understand the gospel message, how to share the gospel, right? What are the components of that? How do you do that? But also to be able to share their story and to see that they are already in relationships with people, right? Some people will come into their lives and they'll be sharing it, but that they have already existing relationships with lost people that God has put them in relationship with. So releasing that story of grace, taking intentional steps to do that, and seeing that as an opportunity that God's given them.
That's right.
Right.
We talk a lot about helping people identify with this outcome of grace story.
Right.
Identify unbelievers in their lives,
Right.
pray for them, engage them relationally,
and
create
share.
some relational space, and then the last one would be share. So that becomes an important priority for church leadership, to equip the people that God has entrusted to church leadership in that area specifically.
Absolutely.
And that's how a place will be reached with the gospel. If people are pursuing God as their highest priority, if their lives are in keeping with that, and they're submitting their lives to Jesus, and they're bearing fruit. And you mentioned the third one now, grace story.
And you see how these, they build on each other.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying one is more important than the other per se, but they're building on each other. You're spending time with the Lord. You're making decisions that are in keeping with and now you're representing Him.
That's right.
The fourth one is we believe that every believer, everyone who has the Spirit of God within them, has also been gifted to serve Him. Right? Paul is pretty clear that God arranges the body, right? That God designs people and desires to give them gifts, and that the Spirit of God then applies those gifts to their lives, right? And
1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12,
and
other places.
Each believer has gifts that he's used or that he's been given, he or she has been given to serve the common good, right? They're not gifts to make a big deal about who they are, right? Like, I don't think necessarily you need to figure out your spiritual gift and then put it on your business card or anything like that. But they've been given for the common good to serve one another. And I think also to serve the world, right? I don't think they're church exclusive, like only for Sunday morning. I think that you have the opportunity really to use those gifts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, I don't think that they're the only way you can serve, but that they are ways that you can serve generally in keeping with your passions, your interests. They generally coincide with those things. And you and I, we have different gifts, right?
Yes, we do.
And they complement one another, right? And as we serve together, right, it helps build the body. And then as you bring the body together and those complementary gifts come together, right, we can all serve, we can all build the body, we can all serve our city, the neighborhood, all of those things, and it glorifies the Lord as we do that. And so there's this inside serving, there's this outside serving. And so, again, now we're called to help people, right, discover and sharpen those gifts, use those gifts, flex those muscles. So all of them understanding those things and utilizing those things. And again, I think that those are best discovered in the context of relationship. Yeah.
And by serving, by doing, by meeting needs.
As people are in Christian community serving together, that other people would be able to look, hey, Levi, when you do this, it blesses all of us. Yeah. Right? When you serve, it's so clear that God's gifted you to do X. Yeah. You think you might be doing Y, but X is really... I
read recently that one way to help identify some of your spiritual gifts are if you often see a need in the church or in the community and you're maybe frustrated that the church hasn't met that need yet, or your church isn't doing something about it, that's often an indication that you have the ability to see a hole where other people don't see, and that could be an indication that that's actually where you're gifted to serve.
Sure, absolutely.
So we mentioned 4 buckets now pursuit of God, fruit of the Spirit, grace story, and the fourth one was spiritual giftedness. So we'll go to the last one now.
Right.
Set that up.
The last one we call the stewardship of life, right? And it's the understanding that everything in life has been entrusted to you from the Father by your Heavenly Father. You know, James says that every good and perfect gift has been given to you by the Father of the heavenly lights. And so we understand that everything in a follower of Jesus' life, whether that be the ability to breathe, whether that be a spouse, children, finances, a home, whatever. Those are all gifts that God has given. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is we want to utilize those things. Time, the ability to work, all of those things, like your whole life, right? We take all of those things for granted. You get up in the morning, you throw some coffee down your gullet, and you run out, to work, and you don't even think about your day. And yet every aspect and every facet of a person's day is something that's being orchestrated by God. Mm-hmm. And how do I steward these things? My time, my talent, my treasure, my relationships. How do I steward all of those things?
Opportunities, responsibilities,
everything,
all of that.
Everything for the glory of God. Because I belong to Him, right? And so if it's something that He's put in my hands, if it's something He's put in my pocket, if it's someone He's put next to me, all of those things, they belong to Him. And so how do I see my life differently? That I'm stewarding all of these things for the glory of God. Mm-hmm. Not for me, not for my benefit. I'm not living my life X amount of years until I retire. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with retiring. That's not what I'm saying.
But our primary objective is
not retirement. But it's not that's not my go-to. I'm not living for the paycheck. I'm not living for the this or for the that. Everything in life is about how do I take these things and glorify God with them? How do I take these children and glorify God with them? How do I take whatever it may be? Mm-hmm. So it's really a complete paradigm shift for the follower of Jesus with regard to their entire life. And again, so if you go around that all five of them, I have an intimate relationship with God, right? And that's being borne out in my relationships with others. I'm sharing Jesus with people. I'm using the gifts that He's called me to serve Him. And I see my life as, I see it as belonging to Him. And I'm just seeking to leverage that for His honor and His glory 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so for us, for me, like that's discipleship.
Yep.
That's what a follower of Jesus looks like. You notice we didn't say they've gone to X amount of Bible classes. Nothing wrong with going to Bible classes.
It can help you grow in those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's not the metric in of itself.
That they're in vocational ministry, that they're wherever. And so what we then want to do, this is who they're becoming, right? This is who they are. And then, as we talked about last time with the circle of accountability, you want to fill that circle, right, with these types of people.
Because of a village, a town, a city,
it's filled with these types of people.
It's filled with people that are growing,
right,
being sanctified, right, growing in holiness. We've given some being discipled and discipling others.
They're going to represent Jesus in those places. And so individuals, homes, congregations, right, you want to fill those geographies with these types of people, mm-hmm, and they will be the ones that represent Him. And so you have an expectation of discipleship rather than just blindly saying, go make disciples.
Yep.
Right? We want to have an expectation of disciples. And then we want to, I think as good leaders, you want to measure that on a regular basis. How are we doing with that? How are we doing that with that? We measure that with surveys here. That's not everybody thinks like that around the world, but however you're going to do that as a leader, you want to have your hand on the pulse of your people. How are they growing? Are they reading the scriptures, right? And are we leading them to do that, or are they too dependent on us? Mm-hmm. How are their marriages? How are their relationships? Are they sharing the gospel? You want to be measuring those things, not to brag about it, not to toot your horn or to whatever, but because you care about them being healthy, vibrant followers of Jesus who are able then to represent him in the place that God's called you to be.
Yeah, and I'm going to repeat two things that you said for emphasis. One, you said this is discipleship, and it's not just the blanket, we're to make disciples. I think every church leadership is going to recognize, we're to make disciples. Mm-hmm. But then the follow-up question is, okay, well, what is a disciple biblically? And if they're on their A game, they'll say, okay, well, a disciple, from that Greek word, it's a lifelong learner and follower of Jesus Christ. Okay, great. But let's give greater biblical definition to that. What does that look like?
What does it look like?
What does it look like in the life of people? And I think if we're looking at the scriptures, we found it helpful to put them in these 5 buckets so that they're easy to communicate, mm-hmm. easy to remember, and easy to measure, which brings me to the second point. I just want to highlight for emphasis that you said it. Part of a leadership's stewardship within their local church is to evaluate, measure with some regularity, are people growing and maturing in these discipleship aspects?
Right.
You alluded to a survey. That is one thing that we do on the regular to evaluate.
Right.
I think another important component on how to measure these things in the life of the people in our church goes back to something we said earlier. What percentage of the people in our church are in a smaller form of biblical community, mm-hmm. so that as two of the pastors and elders at the church, we're not going to know everyone and all the ins and outs and all their lives. I don't know if they're growing in all of these things.
I'm not in their home.
Right. But if they're in some type of smaller biblical community, we can talk to the leadership, like someone in the church knows. We can talk to the leadership of that community. We can talk to other people in that community, and they know that follower of Christ, let's call him Sam. Sam is, he's loving his wife well. He's serving his children. He's struggling in work in these areas. He's been confessing these things, but he's being victorious in Christ in these areas. And you begin to be, though it's anecdotal, they're connected with enough people in the church where it can be measured.
Right.
And you can have some sense of where people are struggling. Mm-hmm. You also have a sense of, what people are living in unrepentant, unconfessed, habitual, ongoing sin that need to be rebuked and admonished. Where, as a church collectively, you need to focus the attention of leadership, because this is a weakness in your church. Where you can celebrate and continue to urge people to do not grow weary in doing good in this area. All of that is responsible leadership.
Absolutely.
We're going back to how we set up the episode. This is what I think biblical faithfulness looks like for a church leadership. This is what success looks like. Whether it's 50 people in your church or 1,500, are the people that you have been entrusted to shepherd, oversee, lead, are they, over time, by and large, growing and maturing in these areas? And this becomes a critical then component, as you said, to reaching an area, making the gospel accessible to an area, and taking spiritual responsibility for an area.
Absolutely. It becomes the critical component. Because if the people aren't growing, you can be a great preacher. I mean, that's really what's happened.
Yeah.
Right?
And preaching is a way to help people grow.
Yeah.
But that's not...
We're both preachers.
Yeah.
Right? We both value preaching, the preaching of God's word. But I think we both understand its role and its context.
Right.
And its role and its context isn't to be the primary driver of a local congregation and the come and see mentality, right? It is an equipping. It has an equipping function in the life of the congregation and helps set the guardrails of orthodoxy as they come and they hear the proclaimed word of God. But the primary means of their spiritual formation is going to be as they open the scriptures, right, in their home, and as they open the scriptures with one another.
Yep. And then you add preaching into that,
and then you
got
add preaching
these
into
multifaceted ways
into the mix.
Yep.
Right. And so, rather than it just be, well, we went to church on Sunday and heard the preacher say something,
And that's the extent of their
and that's
Christianity.
the extent of their Christianity. It is part of the diet, right? It is not the whole of the diet. And so if we're going to take seriously the task that Christ has given us to make disciples, right? We have to know what that means. And then we as leaders have to be committed to doing, right, that. And then I think you have to be committed to doing that with an expectation that then those disciples aren't just like good-looking disciples that you put up on a shelf.
Yeah.
Like, look at what I made. Just like your children, right? You're shaping and you're forming your children, and you're sending them out.
That's right. Yeah,
To
you're
do
launching
something.
them.
You're launching them
Yeah.
to do something. And so we want them to grow, and we want them to do. We want them to grow and to be faithful, godly men and women, boys and girls, right? Because there's not an age at which they can become representatives of Jesus. And we want to release them to represent him in the places that God has them, businesses, neighborhoods, schools, parks, wherever that be.
That's right. Well, amen. Thanks for your time, brother.
Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and mission of the church. This podcast is produced by Saturation Church Planning. Saturation Church Planning exists to glorify God through partnering with church leaders in nations, regions, cities throughout the world towards the full evangelization of those places through the mobilization of the church. For more information, please visit scpglobal.org.